What's the craziest thing your boss asked you to do? Story 1. My boss at this little marketing gate in Denver was a nutcase. Think tech bro energy with zero chill. One day, he storms into the office, red-faced, and goes, "I need you to catch my chicken." I'm like, "What?" Turns out he brought his pet rooster, Clucky, to work for some TikTok stunt, and it escaped onto the roof of our low-do building. He hands me a fishing net and a stale bagel, yelling, "Lure him down, he's my brand mascot now." So there I am, 10 stories up, wind whipping my hair, chasing this psychotic bird around HVAC units. It's pecking at my Nikes, feathers everywhere, and I'm slipping on gravel, praying I don't eat myself off the edge. Took 45 minutes, finally nabbed it when it got distracted by the bagel crumbs. Boss gave me a $20 Starbucks card and said, "You're a legend. I still smell chicken poop when it rains." Story 2. Worked in food and beverage at a hotel. I had lots. We were told to continue using expired milk products. We didn't do it. The chef, who had a massive ego even for a chef, convinced the hotel to let him put on these super pretentious 20-person private dinners at $85 per ticket. Each time they would sell less than half of the tickets, so we were asked to buy the remaining tickets ourselves and give them to family members. Also, they could pretend the chef's latest vanity project was a success. I was once asked to cut my vacation short because my boss realized none of my coworkers had any clue how to do my work while I was gone. I was on the other side of the world at the time. Once, while I was on disability due to an injury, my boss angrily called me demanding I explain why I had missed a mandatory staff meeting. I could keep going for hours. Hospitality really is a piece of this industry to work in. Story 3. Used to deliver pizza for Domino's on an e-bike. The e-bikes we used had a bunch of wiring underneath the saddles. One day the wiring caught on fire while I was delivering an order, so the fire started burning underneath my butt. Also, obviously, the batteries stopped working, so it became very tough to ride the e-bike. Asked the shift manager of that evening if I could get another e-bike to use for the rest of the evening. He told me as long as you're not on fire yourself, you're using this e-bike. Quit my job shortly after that. Story 4. At the beginning of COVID, most of our pregnant patients were staying at home and not coming to the hospital for minor things such as mild abdominal pain, UTI, STD checks, etc. as they had before because they were scared to come to a hospital. Our census obviously dropped. To try to get the census back up, our managers told us that if a patient called asking whether they should come to the hospital or not, we were supposed to just tell them to come no matter what their complaint was, even if it was something that they absolutely did not need to come in for. I refused to do this, so I just transfer any calls to my charge nurse and let them deal with it. Let's bring an already immunocompromised pregnant patient to the hospital in the very beginning of an unpredictable pandemic for something they don't really need to come in for, sure. Story 5. Worked at a crappy college town pizza place that paid me $5 per hour, plus tips under the table. It would get insanely busy on days when there were football games and the boss required all hands on deck. 12-plus-hour days were not uncommon when there was a game. I got to the store at 10 a.m., 2 hours before opening, and worked until 3 a.m. the following day. By the time 2 a.m. rolls around and the crowds finally die down and we start closing shop and cleaning up, my boss pulls back the entire front counter, which was on wheels, to reveal dozens of little roaches scattering everywhere. He gave me a broom and told me to clean out the roaches. I waited for him to go out back to smoke a cigarette. I took everything from the tip jar and left. Never went back. Story 6. A long time ago, I worked at a grocery store. They decided to no longer get the cleaners that came in with special gear to clean out the compactor, presumably to make extra money. The compactor began to stink to high heaven. I'm talking about rotten meat, produce, etc. So they asked me to climb inside and clean it. I laughed at them and said no. I told all my coworkers to say no. One did not listen and went in and cleaned it. He had to go home because he stunk so bad and reeked for days afterwards. There is a reason a specialist comes in to clean it, wears a hazmat suit, and has the machine disconnected with another person standing there making sure no one turns it on. Story 7. I was temping at a startup, and my boss was this woo-woo lady obsessed with vibes. One rainy afternoon, she drags me to the parking lot behind our building in Austin, 6th Street area, holding a deck of tarot cards and a sage stick. She's like, "Read my future, it's urgent." I've never touched tarot, but she's burning sage in the drizzle, waving it over her Prius, insisting the car's cursed after a fender bender. I'm flipping cards on the wet hood, death, the fool, some upside-down moon thing, making up BS like, big changes ahead. She's nodding, crying, then hugs me, sage ash in my hair. Took 20 minutes, my sneakers soaked, and she tipped me $5 for a spiritual insight. Car still wouldn't start the next day. Story 8. My manager at this sketchy bar was a sleazy dude with a gold chain and too much cologne. One slow night, he pulls me aside, smirking, and goes, "I need you in my tape, don't freak out." I'm wiping down tables, thinking he's drunk, but he's serious. Wants me to pop in frame, fully clothed, delivering pizza while he's performing with his girlfriend. Says it's for their OF, adds realism. Under my apron, holding a cold Domino's box, knocking on his apartment door upstairs, camera rolling as he's grunting on the couch. I mutter, "Pizza's here," drop it, and sprint out, hearing her giggle. Paid me $50 cash, said I'm a natural. I still gag thinking about it. Story 9. Ex-boss. He asked me to finish a litter of kittens by throwing them over an embankment. I was driving the front-end loader over to a pile of bark chips that we had covered up for quite some time. I pulled back the plastic cover and saw a fuzzy gray pile. It turned out to be a fresh litter of kittens, eyes haven't even opened. I phoned it into my boss, and he said that there was no time to help them, and to just toss them over the embankment because we had customers waiting. I scoffed, hung up the phone, and immediately called my girlfriend to come pick up the little floofs to take them to the local shelter. He's an ex-boss for a reason. Honestly, I was not surprised that he asked me to do that. The dude was a complete prick. He confided so much nasty dump to me that I could write a book. Story 10. My first real job out of college was one I lucked into. I ended up working for a local business in a role kinda sorta related to my degree, but my responsibilities were light, and I was honestly probably paid more than I was worth. Essentially, I was a glorified office IT guy, but in a specific professional field. Sort of an office troubleshooter crossed with an intern. Anyway, my boss, who is honestly a really nice guy, ended up tasking me with running some cables from our office to his house across an empty lot he owned in between the two, and he wanted them laid in a trench in some kind of waterproof conduit, and I had no help. So basically, he wanted me to plan it out, search out and price the materials, submit that to him to actually purchase all of it, potentially arrange equipment rentals, go out and dig a trench and run cables through a pipe, figure out how to run the cables and pipe through one or both buildings' walls, etc. Basically way above and beyond anything I was doing there day to day, and both barely and only technically related to my job, since one of them would have been an Ethernet connection. After apprehensively talking it over with him for a few days, he started to realize how big the project would be and decided to go in a different direction, much to my hidden relief. Story 11. My boss at a grocery/retail store told me to pour 4 big jugs of this industrial glass cleaner down the sink drain in one of 2 public washrooms. They've been in the back so many years one chewed through the plastic and melted all the paint off the shelf. Honestly, don't know how I didn't damage my vision with the chemicals in the air. Long story short, I ended up with a few chemical burns on my arms and hands with not as little as an apology. Story 12. Asking me to stay late. Doesn't sound so bad, but this guy would sit in the office all day playing games on his phone and watching videos. When it would get busy, he would come out for 10 or 15 minutes for vanity purposes, to show he was just like us. You weren't like us, Steve. You did next to nothing all day and asked us to sacrifice our lives for your subpar fast food place. He paid me $8.30 per hour in an area that had a median rent cost of almost $900 a month. The only reason I took the job was because I was in a difficult situation, and they were the first ones to get back to me. But I would have performed unpleasant tasks for $8.31 per hour. Good riddance, Steve. I still can't believe you gave me a hard time for needing to go to the ER for severe chest pain. I hope you're still working for that less than ideal company. Story 13. I used to work at Taco Bell, and on the receipt there was a little online survey at the bottom. My manager told me to go through the trashes to find receipts that people had thrown out so that we could fill them out ourselves so our store would get a better rating. I was a stupid 17-year-old, so of course I did it. We used to give ourselves perfect reviews all the time actually. Story 14. I had a boss that whenever we weren't busy at night, which wasn't very often but still, or if it was raining, he just said we will be closing, and that I should come in tomorrow X amount of hours earlier, X being the hours we closed earlier than we should have. As if it's my fault for bad weather or low foot traffic, and as if it's my responsibility to cover those hours. In the beginning, when I first started, I was ashamed to admit that I did it a couple of times, But after that, I always answered that I had other responsibilities and couldn't. I should mention I was a full-time employee that worked split hours 6 times a week, 10 o'clock, 14 o'clock, and again, 19 o'clock, 23 o'clock. Story 15. My boss asked me to take his daughter to prom. I was a junior and she was a sophomore who desperately wanted the high school clout of going to prom before she was allowed to. You had to be a junior or a senior to be admitted, unless you were a +1. I wasn't planning to go, so I had no date anyway. I agreed and he covered my tux in a limo. His daughter was pretty. I only knew her in passing at the time as we were in a band but played different instruments. We went out to dinner beforehand and I showed her a great time. Then the limo took us home. The next day I was at work and my boss's wife came by and told me this girl had a huge crush on me and that I made her year. I took her out on a few more dates and we're still friends to this day. I was a real dumbhead in my youth, but that's one of the times where I wasn't, and I still think back on it fondly. Story 16. I was happy to get hired as the second IT guy for about 300 people. Worked my bum off for 2 years, carrying the other guy, with lots of extra hours. Finally, I saw a novella on alcoholics and the games they'd play to hide it, and realized I'd been totally played by the other IT guy. Immediately met with my boss and said what the heck. He and everybody else knew it, and asked me to just continue pulling extra weight and not make waves because it could become a big problem. Another guy totaled his car a week later. His third in 2 years, people were hurt, and he couldn't talk his way out of it. Story 17. I was an intern. Supervisor called me up on a Saturday to ask if I could deliver a thumb drive by car to Cape Cod. They'd pay a flat rate and reimburse for gas. I told her I wasn't sure since I'd literally just been in an accident. She paused and said, "So do you think you can do this for us?" I ended up driving for like 4 hours round trip in the rain to deliver a piece of plastic. Made like a $30 courier tip though, lol. Story 18. I worked at an AM/PM and my boss was terrified of rats. We had mice, and instead of hiring an exterminator, he brought me cotton balls and an air horn, and instructed me to use an air horn to herd/scare the mice out the open back door with the cotton in my ears, while he hid in his office. I felt like such an idiot, but I did it. Shockingly, it was ineffective. Story 19. I worked at an independent retailer. The owner pocketed a lot of money and never wanted to spend anything. We had a massive rat infestation. Instead of getting help, my boss had me create a position just for wiping rat piss and poop off of beer 6-packs before being put out. Story 20. I was an intern in a small engineering office, drawing floor plans and such, but my bosses always pushed me to do more and more. I woke up one day, during the pandemic, with a bunch of messages from one of them asking me to go somewhere more than 30 kilometers away, so we could demolish a concrete ladder. Just went back to sleep.
That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.